Ah, the Mages Guild. I'm not even sure how to approach this faction. So let's start with some history. This faction is the work of Brian Chapin, an Elder Scrolls forum admin turned Morrowind world designer. He's alleged to be responsible for the Cliff Racer population. He got to switch into quest design and writing position with Tribunal. As with all things Bethesda, it's difficult to specifically credit which quests he's responsible for, although there is more certainty he's responsible for the Oblivion Mages Guild questline and Mothership Zeta DLC from Fallout 3. So, how did he do? Well, I'm generally against saying that factions are outright bad to start. I think the angle we need to take is this. Is the Mages Guild a good magical faction? And the answer is not really. Mostly because the faction is basically Harry Potter. Gotta get back to Hogwarts. I don't know if you know this, but the Prisoner of Azkaban movie came out in 2004, and this was basically the beginning of the fantasy obsession with magical high school, which is not, and never has been, the purpose of the Mages Guild in Elder Scrolls. Now, sure, you have places like the Arcane University and the College of Winterhold, but I think it's important to remember the historical purposes of universities and colleges, which wasn't primarily education, but rather the aggregation of knowledge and primary research. Rather, the Elder Scrolls setting is typically characterized as having magical education fall into two camps: self-experimentation or direct apprenticeship. I don't think there's ever been a good magical faction in Elder Scrolls. The closest we ever got was House Telvanni. This is half a mechanics problem and half a passion problem. Simply put, there's a Mages Guild in Oblivion because it's expected of the series for there to be a magical faction, and because the faction is being made without passion, it can't genuinely gate content behind the expectation that the player knows or even has access to any kind of complex magic. Stealth and combat get two factions each, while magic has a single faction to be defined by. Now, the Mages Guild has to be accessible to Todd, and Todd is rather famously a barbarian player. The Mages Guild never requires you to actually cast magic reliant on your character's skill level. In other words, the game will always provide the necessary scrolls on the rare occasion that a quest requires a spell effect. Now, this is a problem I noted as well in the Morrowind video. However, Morrowind offset this problem in a key way: faction requirements. Even if the Morrowind quests themselves never required the player to personally cast magic, House Telvanni and the Mages Guild both require a magical skill to be raised to 70 and 80 respectively. Oblivion, inversely, has a few quests which encourage spell usage and one quest that outright requires it, but it has no means of verifying that the player is actually a spellcaster, outside of the most pedantic and technical sense of being a person who casts spells, albeit with scrolls. Scrolls have always been in an awkward position given they're in the name of the game. They provide an opportunity for non-magical characters to try out and utilize magic. In Morrowind, for instance, players without the Mysticism skill could still purchase Alms of the Intervention scrolls, allowing them to teleport back to Tribunal temples. Emphasis is on purchase. Players who lack the skill have to spend money to supplement that lack of skill. If a player is skilled in Mysticism and can cast the spell, that means they may have a new weakness they need to supplement instead. Oblivion cut this down. The utility function of scrolls is lessened because there are less utility spells overall. One use for scrolls in Morrowind was for warriors who didn't have security or alteration and couldn't unlock chests, so they could purchase Ondicized scrolls instead. Oblivion's equivalent open scrolls, however, are now randomized loot. So instead of having a reliable alternative, it's more of a coupon the player can use to avoid playing the lockpicking minigame. Charm is another good use of scrolls, but only for the first couple levels in Oblivion. Even then, there are far fewer instances where high disposition matters at all. Once the player starts raking in those fame points and faction disposition bonuses, charm scrolls are worthless. Summon scrolls are another good supplement for players who want to summon but don't use Conjuration. Yeah, we're really getting into niche markets now. But they can't rely on scrolls as part of their playstyle because almost all scrolls are, again, randomized loot. The problem, or perhaps intention behind the system, is that players can't create scrolls. I mean, technically yes, but it's extremely cost prohibitive in Morrowind. So they're just relegated to bonuses and demonstrations of magic, which meant sometimes I forgot about scrolls even being in my arsenal because of the UI. No, please, not yet. Spellcrafting in Oblivion was a misstep in my opinion. The player can only create new spells after gaining admittance into the Arcane University, or for the low price of $189. And once spells are created, they can't be deleted. So creating spells for a specific purpose and then later losing that purpose means you're stuck with a worthless spell. It seems like being able to craft scrolls as one-offs to test spell ideas or for specific use cases would work really well, instead of going the opposite direction of making spell creation increasingly difficult to impossible in Skyrim. But let's walk this back to the guild. You can join it in a guild hall, which provides access and ownership to many of the objects in the guild halls, with no responsibilities. It's a miracle more people don't become associates. Anyways, to join the university, we're going to need a recommendation from every guild hall, meaning every city, except the Imperial city and Kvatch and such. So let's go on tour of Cyrodiil's cities. Bruma. I started by joining the guild in Bruma.
Hello there! Are you here to join the Mages Guild?
The Bruma recommendation entails finding a missing mage who isn't missing but has in fact turned invisible to prank his boss. You can investigate by asking around, or you can use a detect spell to find Jaskar. You'll eventually be led to Volinaro, who will dispel Jaskar's invisibility if we steal a book from Jean, and he teaches us an open spell to unlock her desk. Or you can dispel it yourself if you're a nut job who actually owns a dispel on touch or target effect. I appreciate the magical path to this quest, but here's how I would have done it. Jean suspects that Jaskar is invisibly hiding, but as others will point out, Jean isn't very good at magic. She has her position due to nepotism, but she will point out that Volinaro happens to know Detect Life and Dispel, and that we should ask him for training under the guise of our new membership. The quest has the same dichotomy as Volinaro and Jaskar versus Jean. We can use dialogue to solve the problem, or we can use magic. I would go so far as to say the desk is magically locked and can't be physically unlocked, so both paths require some magic to be used. As it stands, the player can bypass the magic of this quest with the security skill and a disposition check, no magic required. Which in a microcosm is fine, but with the rest of the guild is disappointing. Speaking of disappointing, Bruma. Bruma is the northernmost city of Cyrodiil, sitting at the base of the Chorrol Mountains, which serves as a natural border to Skyrim. However, due to Oblivion maintaining the scale of Morrowind, it actually feels more appropriate to say that the Red Ring Road near Lake Rumari is the base of the mountains, and Bruma sits just above the snow line. In any case, Bruma shares a cultural overlap with Skyrim, at least on paper. In reality, the people do not dress for the climate and spend their days loitering in the cold, and the Nordic culture is superficial at best. This is, in all likelihood, because what the Nords actually were supposed to be hadn't been worked out yet. The Chapel of Talos dominates the city, with a nearby section of wooden shacks copied from other cities that look out of place in the northern climate. The town also lacks a cohesive plan. You have a row of higher-end housing, but at the end of the row far from the gate is the smith. You then have a ridge with the guild halls, but someone's house is also up there. Just switch the house and smith around. Then there's another ridge which has most of the businesses. I think the ridge premise is fine, but it needs to shift some stuff around to better centralize the commercial area. And you would think the Bruma Fighters Guild would have been mentioned at least once, considering it's located near Skyrim, a land defined by fighters. Cheydinhal. Cheydinhal sits below the Vallis Mountains, which border Cyrodiil and Morrowind, although this time below the snow line. Our recommendation here comes from Falcar, who seems less than pleased that we want a recommendation and sends us off to do grunt work, retrieving a ring he believes was tossed in the well. We have to get a key from Deetsan, but she insists that we speak when Falcar isn't present. Yeah? Can we hurry this up? You aren't even trying to get away from him.
Well met, guildmate.
Poor Tivila. I hear she is turning Cheydinhal inside out.
Deetsan informs us that we aren't the first associate to go after the ring, which is alarming given how simple the task is. She gives us the key and teaches us a weak feather and water breathing spell. In the well, we find the ring, which weighs 150 pounds, and the corpse of the last associate to attempt this task. Imagine drowning because you refuse to drop the ring. Anyways, we return to find Falcar has left after an argument with Deetsan. He got mad that she had helped us, and then she threatened to report him to the council, even though from her perspective, he had done nothing wrong. Deetsan's getting ahead of the script. She only has grounds to report Falcar after the revelation of Vidkin's death comes up to light. What if Vidkin had taken the ring and skipped town, or just left the guild in general?
They will talk to each other about how the water tastes off, but for all we know, that could just be one of those mountain lions that sneak into cities falling into the well.
The only hint of foul play is that Deetsan was aware of the ring's abnormal heaviness, which she herself doesn't directly indicate to the player despite having the opportunity. Meaning if we had died as well, she would now be culpable. We go downstairs to search his room for the recommendation. Yeah, sure. And instead find his dildo 2 black soul gems. The significance of which is intentionally lost on the player, as this is their first appearance in the setting in a quest like this. Black soul gems are used to capture sapient souls, i.e. the souls of elves, humans, and beastfolk. Black soul gems are an interesting topic we'll get into later. Their presence here allegedly means that Falcar is a necromancer, which is not true given the player can possess black soul gems but can't learn necromancy. Here are the problems. Falcar was apparently aiming to kill Mages Guild associates, and his idea is clever enough for exactly one murder. His fatal flaw? Sending the associates to Deetzan to get the key. If Falcar was a necromancer, wouldn't he have removed the body for, well, necromantic purposes? And why would he possess the Black Soul Gems if he wasn't trying to get the associates' souls? I'm surprised he doesn't have a Mannimarco poster in his room for how amateurish his efforts at sabotage are. Deetzan then accuses Falcar without evidence, and rather than discrediting her or killing her, he just storms off in a huff. Killing her would have been on the table too, considering Falcar just goes off to live in an alien ruin after this. And sure, the game offers a magical solution to the ring problem, except the player doesn't actually need to bring the ring to Deetzan. The well is so small and the player doesn't need the water breathing effect, and 5 points of feather is not going to help much with the weight. Deetzan offers to write the recommendation in place of Falcar, so a theme of the Mages Guild questline is this dichotomy between talented magicians versus the more bureaucratic members of the guild. In a sense, the guild has lost its way as a magical institution and is now purely focused on magical regulation. This mostly took the form of gradual bans on magic like teleportation and levitation, but has recently extended to necromancy as well. The questline, though, doesn't actually acknowledge the latter restrictions, but is primarily about the schism created by the ban of necromancy. We'll have to discuss that later. Did you know that Cheydinhal has a statue of Galarian? I'm not quite certain what his connection with Cheydinhal is supposed to be, just worth noting given that he was the guy who founded the Mages Guild. The city is supposed to be inspired by Dunmer architecture, yet looks nothing like any of the Dunmer buildings seen in Morrowind. The adobe material would likely be rarer, sure, but it isn't even visually similar to Mournhold. In fact, design-wise, it's the antithesis. Mournhold had angled roofs, but they are almost flat, while Cheydinhal's roofs are almost vertical. The doors and windows of Mournhold are defined by sharp angles, while the doors and windows of Cheydinhal are rounded. And Mournhold's main theme is a seafoam green, while Cheydinhal has uniformity in their purple color scheme. In fact, Cheydinhal appears closer to the Imperial architecture of Pelagiad and Caldera, rather than any Dunmer style, and that reflects on its people as well. There are almost as many orcs living in Cheydinhal as there are Dunmer, and what Dunmer do reside here are far more imperialized than even the worst of House Halalu. It's bizarre that given the massive religious schism that is currently embroiling Morrowind during this time period, that there aren't apparently any new or old tribunal worshippers in Cheydinhal. There's one NPC who will remark on this, Arvis Addis, but someone decided to put this character in the Leyawiin chapel instead of Cheydinhal's chapel.
I used to be a priest of the Tribunal Temple in Craigenmore. After the collapse, I drifted for a while until I joined the chapel. The Beggars and the Wicked Thieves Guild still trouble me. I wish the 9 Divines offered charity and comfort to the poor, like the temple did.
Here you have your chapel-going Imperials and your chapel-dodging Dark Elves, and never the twain shall meet. The Imperials have the gold, houses, and top spots. Dark Elves like me left Morrowind and the whole priest-ridden tribunal nightmare. And we take the whole patriotic Imperial mission attitude with a dose of salt.
Cheydinhal at least has a more functional design, with a clear divide between its commercial and residential areas. And the city's quite beautiful, with the contrast between the buildings and the plants and the river that flows through the middle of it, but to say that it has heavy Dunmer influences is little more than flavor text. Like the questlines, the cities had individual designers, and we know that Cheydinhal was the work of Megan Sawyer, who started at Bethesda with Oblivion. You can even see her working on the city in the Making of Oblivion documentary. Leyawiin. Degale is the head of the guild hall and asks us to recover her personal amulet, pointing us to Agata. Most of the guild hall is dissatisfied with Degale, as without her amulet she simply isn't fit to lead. Calthar is the most vocal about this, which isn't surprising given his tragic facial status. Agata asks us to pry, and Calthar reveals Degale's father for some reason. Degale in turn points us to the fort her father was stationed at.
I know where you must go. Blood ran blue and dragons flew high. Under broken towers and broken bodies it now lies, waiting to be found.
That may sound like a riddle of some sort, but it's only solvable if you happen to know the names of all the local forts, which is why a quest marker pops up, pointing us exactly to it. Unfortunately, Calthar also got a quest marker and turns up as soon as we get her father's amulet.
Why are you trying to ruin everything?
I'm just now learning this. According to the wiki, Calthar can reveal that he was a necromancer but ended his practice when the guild banned it. This is a revelation to me, and this is not the first time, even in the last 2 years, that I've played this questline. Yet in all my playthroughs, I've never learned this basic fact, because I've never thought to ask Kalthar about the Mages Guild. That's a pretty important piece of information about his character to not include in any of the main dialogue. I thought he was just some asshole with a half-misguided, half-legitimate grievance against the guild who took it out the wrong way. This quest is so much worse with this new information in mind for reasons that bear mentioning when we talk about the Necromancers. So, we give Degale the amulet and she sends off the recommendation. I think the weirdest part of the quest is that the antagonist is the one that proposes the solution, which is weird because Kalthar's never given a legitimate reason to care about Degale's father. Hell, given that she and her father are Bosmer and she's on the older side, it doesn't seem like something Kalthar would know about. So, Leyawiin. I put some feelers out there, and Leyawiin seems to rank in the lower end of Imperial cities, at least in a lot of people's opinions. Leyawiin isn't the ugliest city, we'll get to that. It's colorful and has a unique aesthetic without making it seem like the local homeowners association commissions the Dark Brotherhood to enforce the roof color. If I had to guess, there are two problems with Leyawiin. The first is the aforementioned aspect I discussed in the Fighters Guild section about how the player is expected to make so many trips down here. Even with fast travel, it can be annoying having to scroll the map down to Leyawiin. That's for the benefit of doing quests in Leyawiin, and there are more bad quests than good here. And that's grading on the curve that is the standard of Oblivion quests. In addition, Leyawiin isn't laid out that well. It does a decent job of not mixing its commercial and residential areas together, but then there's this guild area. The way you fix this is to switch the guild area and the chapel around and then swap the Fighters and Mages Guild so that the Mages Guild is closest to the gate because the Fighters Guild serves no purpose here. The Blackwood Company is a quest finale and the bookstore is a bookstore and a post-Morrowind Elder Scrolls game. Leyawiin sits at the apex of Cyrodiil, Elsewhere, and Black Marsh. Despite its advantageous naval position, it doesn't actually have a port, which is just bizarre given wars have been fought over cities that sit on naval choke points. For gameplay reasons, the river isn't even deep enough for ships to actually pass. It's a shame Oblivion was also the game to portray the lowest amount of racial tension, considering how interesting the conflict between the Khajiit natives, Argonian immigrants, and Imperial nobles is in this city. There's nothing to hint at the fact that the Khajiit went against the Empire in the war that occurred between Oblivion and Skyrim just based on this population. Bravil.
No! No, not Brazil! No! No, please! Anything but that! No!
Oh, Bravil. Canonically, it's the worst town in Cyrodiil. That doesn't stop the designers from trying, at least. It's a fun city to just run around because of all the exterior staircases you can use to jump around on the buildings. And it's laid out well, with an upfront commercial area and two separate residential areas. It's hard to get lost in Bravil, despite all the buildings being brown and decrepit. I would say the town's lack of economic prosperity could be due to it being a coastal city with no port, but so's Leyawiin. There's not really any good reason Bravil fails and Leyawiin succeeds. Sure, the Count of Bravil is a prick, but that doesn't cause all the buildings to turn brown and everybody to start taking up skooma. I'm getting the town aspect of this section out of the way because I, like a lot of people, don't like Bravil. A local Dunmer bard has been harassing one of the Mages Guild members, and we're tasked with retrieving her staff from him. Kudai will even give us a scroll to help persuade him. We confront him, and he tells us he did take the staff, but he ended up selling it to someone else in the Imperial City. Quite a ways to go because you felt embarrassed about stealing her stuff. Anyways, Kudai gives us 3 more scrolls and dispatches us to go get the staff back. We can persuade the guy who bought the staff and he'll sell it to us for 200 gold, or we can persuade the wife and she'll tell us where the staff is. We return, give the staff back, and Kudai teaches us a charm spell. Alright, let me be honest. This quest doesn't even feel like it's part of the same quest line. In fact, Kudai has a second quest, Through a Nightmare Darkly, which feels more appropriate to me as the recommendation quest. Oblivion regulars will recognize it as the quest where you enter the guy's dream world and pass 4 tests to escape. In either case, neither quest really has any significance to the broader Necromancer story, and you know, I appreciate that. Instead, it's just a simple little quest to introduce players to charm spells, in the game where charm spells aren't as useful. I'm not sure why the player couldn't have been taught the spell first and expected to use it. That's rhetorical, I know why. It's because players with an illusion level of 5 need to be able to complete this quest. Skingrad. Our next task is simple. Adrian wants us to retrieve some notes she lent to Earthor, but she doesn't know where he is.
Adriana's
Druzia, yet another Argonian in the Recommendation series, points out that Earthor was sent out of the hall to better practice his magic. Adrian then sends us to check up on Earthor, who we find trapped in a cave full of zombies. And he'll refuse to talk to us until every single one is dead, and he telepathically knows if this is true or not. Now, why he's in a cave with 7 zombies is never actually stated. 7's a bit much to accidentally set loose upon yourself, so The implication, I guess, is that the Necromancer sent the zombies to kill Earthor because he's a guild member, even though they could just try recruiting him. He doesn't mention ever speaking with any Necromancers, and he's a bit hasty to move past the why question. If the goal was simply to rescue a forgotten Earthor and not involve the Necromancers at all, then surely it would be better to use a different enemy type, right? Is the idea that Earthor is secretly a Necromancer? Because that doesn't come up. Adriana will teach the player a weak fireball spell to help deal with the zombies, so that's nice. But given this is the simple task of killing X and retrieving Y, any player is again capable of completing this quest. Skingrad sits atop the road, in the sense that the player has to enter and exit the city if they follow the road from the Imperial city to Anvil. And the city, despite this being in the gated area, bridges over this road rather than connecting to it. I almost never use the proper gate into Skingrad. The town forms a loop with a section for merchants and 2 residential areas. Despite Skingrad being close to the Valenwood border, it appears to be an example of a true Cyrodiilic city, and it's well known for its wine, of which 2 separate vineyards exist. This has drawn Sindarion, a famous alchemist, to the city, as well as a whole host of interesting individuals. Simply put, this feels like the first city we've covered to have any kind of unique identity to it, and it's little surprise Skingrad is a common favorite among Oblivion fans. And more than Oblivion fans. Skingrad is popular as an example of a fantasy city design. Its castle sits alone, perched over the city, and the main road design becomes apparent when you read the story of Rizlav the Righteous, the king of Skingrad who trapped an Elysian army in a valley and pelted them with arrows. Excellent city, shame about the recommendation quest. Kvatch. A quick note about Kvatch. We'll discuss it in more detail when we cover the main quest, but this is an area where the lack of interconnectivity between the quest lines really hurt the game. In all honesty, it isn't necromancy that should have been illegalized in Cyrodiil, but conjuration as a whole, considering the planet is currently undergoing the Oblivion crisis. Instead, the Mage's Guild will be characterized as using a Dremora messenger in a situation where Dremora are invading and pillaging the country. Perhaps Conjuration has been proposed to be next, and this has forced the division in the guild. Either way, nobody ever mentions that the guild hall in Kvatch gets destroyed. Anvil. The Anvil Recommendation quest is interesting in that it shows the Mage's Guild actually performing their function as magical regulators. Someone has been ambushing travelers along the Gold Road utilizing frost magic. This is a bit much for a recommendation, and if you're like me, this may have been your first exposure to the Oblivion Mage's Guild. In any case, we're more so acting as bait than actually taking out the highwaymen. We meet with one of the battle mages sent to assist us at the inn, and she directs us to rent a room and use the cover identity as a merchant. Sure enough, one of the other patrons asks our identity and expresses concern given recent events. We sleep. This is one of those quests players trying to avoid leveling have to watch out for, and the battle mage meets us in secret, laying out a plan. The next morning, or whenever really, we set out down the road. Sure enough, the high elf who asked our identity earlier ambushes us, and you may not know this, but she's a necromancer. The clue is really obvious. Don't you see it? It's right before your eyes. Okay, so the trick is to close Oblivion and open the construction set, and then look at the quest scripting to see that she's added to the Necromancer faction when she ambushes us. Oh, were you expecting the clue to be in the game and not just some hidden variable? What's funny is, we get 1 fame point for this quest. You know what else gave us 1 fame point? Finding Jaskar. Anyways, that's the whole quest. Magic in this quest is completely optional, which might be fine if there was a narrative relevance to this quest. Which there isn't. Because at no point does it ever come up that she's a necromancer. So the point of the quest is that the Mage's Guild is a competent organization that is doing its job, which is contrary to what all the other recommendation quests are trying to imply. A few more things. The Anvil Guild Hall is run by Carahil, whose name comes up in an optional side quest about a lich. Hannibal Traven, the current archmage and opponent of necromancy, also used to run the Anvil Guild Hall prior to becoming the leader of the Mages Guild, so perhaps the implication is that Anvil is the only good guild hall? All of that information doesn't come up in the story, however, just like how our roadside bandit being a necromancer doesn't come up either. At least Anvil's a quality town. Anvil's a port city, sitting on the coast between Valenwood and Hammerfell, and Somerset beyond that. I think part of the reason people like Anvil's aesthetic is that it's a proven real-world aesthetic. The city is also clearly influenced by Redguard culture. You have pirates and crime on the waterfront, and then you have the more imperialized Redguards inside the wall. Just need a few Alec here to tie things up. It does suffer somewhat the same problem the other cities have by not making their neighbor races more representative of what their culture is, which is a problem endemic to every race, even Imperials in Oblivion. I don't envy the challenge of trying to capture the unique aesthetics of each race, and it's one of the reasons Cyrodiil was always going to be a bad setting for an Elder Scrolls game, especially during a critical time period as when Oblivion was being developed. Things might have been better if the order of Oblivion and Skyrim had been reversed. In terms of the layout of Anvil, the city's design is simple, but its layout of services buildings are not, with merchant homes sitting amongst each other. That and its distant location makes Anvil not very suitable to using its services. Such. Chorrol. Our final recommendation, completing the outer circle of Cyrodiil cities, is Chorrol. Chorrol is another one of those purely Imperial cities, lacking the Hammerfell or High Rock influences you would expect from its location. People like Chorrol, likely for its simplicity. Services by the main gate, a centralized guild ring, and a separate residential area. As a city, it's mechanically refined, which is important given there are twice as many quests here as, say, Bravil. I guess people also like the really big tree. Tychius wants us to find out what Ariana wants, so she'll leave town. She's looking for a book, Fingers of the Mountain, and even gives us a location, so why doesn't she go get it? She is at least as capable as any associate of the Mages Guild. Anyways, Tychius insists we retrieve the book and bring it to him, and we find the book on a charred corpse to really sell how dangerous it is. This is where the quest branches, which is a rarity for Oblivion. You can give the book to Tychius, or you can give it to Ariana. If we give it to Tychius and then tell Ariana, she insists we steal it back. If we say no, that's the end and we get 2 fame points. If we say yes and do so, or if we give the book to her in the first place, she will spend a day studying the book. We can then take the book back to Tychius, who will overlook whatever path we took and send in our recommendation. If you're like me, you might try to get the book after Ariana tells you, but before consulting with Tychius, in which case it just doesn't appear. You have to tell Daddy about the book before you're allowed to go get it. From here on, the second part of the quest is optional. If we cast a shock spell at the pillar we were at with a Welkin Stone in our inventory and manage to survive a counter spell, we get the Fingers of the Mountain spell, which is not only an underwhelming spell, but its cost is more expensive than equivalent custom spells, making the whole venture pointless. And it's leveled, so at higher levels you get a higher version of the spell. So let's evaluate this for a second. This quest requires no magic to progress. It only requires magic if you want the worthless Fingers of the Mountain spell. There are no consequences for disobeying Tychius, and he's willing to give us a second chance even though we clearly acted in our own self-interest, and his entire motivation is putting down selfish mages like Ariana. Ariana is thankfully not a secret necromancer, hence why we can cooperate with her. This quest has probably the most player choice of any of the quests in the Oblivion Mages Guild. I'd like to posit a theory about this. During the arena section, I stated that the Mages Guild had 2,362 lines, making it the third largest quest line in terms of file space, at least for vocal content. Each branch and dialogue means more voice lines, which is why most of the Mages Guild is so linear in terms of player choice. I have to wonder then if perhaps there were more choices in the original version, but when it came time to crunch things down, the Mages Guild had to shed things down into a single path. I mean, look at the Dark Brotherhood. Each choice potentially results in a unique response. You could probably cut that quest line down from 2,500 to 1,500 lines if you just focused it on a single dialogue option for each prompt. Now, I'm not suggesting Bethesda took a chainsaw to the quest line. It seems to have very little cut content hinted at in the final version, but if every branch offered a second choice, just how much would that balloon the file space? Fallout 3 had to work under the same exact constraints, ending with a similar count of 40,000 voice lines. And the way it incorporated dialogue choice into quest lines was to just have less content overall. It wouldn't be until the primary way we delivered content turned digital that developers could break the shackles of the disc and actually provide choice in a dialogue-heavy game without constraint or limitation. So how come Bethesda hasn't realized it's the current decade and actually embraced player choice? And now I'll say what I've wanted to say after each recommendation quest. Here we have the beginnings of what could have been an interesting quest. I can propose fixes and patches and better ideas all day, but what this questline really needed was a second pass. It feels like a lot of improve this later post-it notes that never got taken off the whiteboard until after the game finished. I think Cheydinhal was probably the best quest narratively, while Chorrol was the best quest from a choice perspective. I think tidying up all the details, like giving Calthar a necromancer robe when he attacks us, giving Caminalda a line about being a necromancer when she attacks us, and indicating that there was an embedded necromancer somewhere in Skingrad that trapped Earthor in that mine, those are all things that would have improved the quest, but I think it just needs a foundational rework. The Imperial City. With all our recommendations done, it's finally time to go to the Arcane University.
Welcome to another magical year at Hogwarts.
Raminus Polis accepts us into the guild and is willing to immediately send us out to go build our staff. But first, the services. At this juncture, we gain access to spellcrafting and enchanting tables, assuming you don't have access to or aren't using Frostcrag Spire, now available for $189. There's also a lush garden to harvest and a couple trainers we unlock. The Imperial City is underwhelming. It's only impressive when you put it in context of other Cyrodiilic cities. When it was decided that Morrowind would be handcrafted rather than a hybrid of procedural generation and handcrafting, the scale of Vvardenfell had to be reduced to make such a game possible. Despite the success of Morrowind and increase in staff, the scale has never been increased. Part of the reason the Imperial City feels small is that it's entirely contained within the walls of the city, even though canonically the entire archipelago, not just one island, is packed full of people. We're talking about the central capital of an empire that spans an entire continent. Now, we can go back and forth all day about how Bethesda didn't have the time, resources, or engine to fully realize the scale of the Imperial City. But I want to take this time to compare some cities between the Howard Elder Scrolls games. This is Balmorra, typically the first Dunmer city the player will visit and the local seat of House Halau. Here's Balmorra compared to a single district of the Imperial City. Sorry, that's actually just Labor Town, a district of Balmorra. Here's Balmorra compared to the Imperial City.
One side of the river in Balmorra has as many houses as an entire district of the Imperial City. Both sides of this frontier town rivals half of what is supposed to be the largest city on the continent.
And Balmorra is just the second largest city on Vvardenfell, with the largest being Vivec City. Now, I discussed the problems with Vivec, and I'm prepared to die on the hill that it's mechanically not a good city. In all reality, I consider the Imperial City a better regional capital than Vivec, and definitely better than the historically rural Solitude. That's because it has a clear and simple market district that's easy to learn. I feel a lot of people may have missed the point with my Vivec section. Vivec is aesthetically a better city, while the Imperial City is mechanically better. Where's the alchemist in the Imperial City? The market district. Where's an alchemist in Vivec? In addition, however, the market district also boasts most of the best merchants in the game, which Vivec does not, so the player is actually encouraged to utilize this area.
People who thought Vivec or Balmorra from Morrowind were big are going to be in for a shock.
The city is divided into 10 districts. The Central Palace District, which sits at the root of White Gold Tower. You would think more than 4 quests take place here given the significance, but no. The Palace District is surrounded by 6 evenly divided districts, and there are 3 more satellite districts. There's the Arcane University, essentially the headquarters of the entire Mages Guild. There's the Imperial Prison, former home of both the Nerevarine and the Champion of Cyrodiil, whoever that is. And there's the waterfront, a port that also contains the residences of pretty much the entire city's supply of poor people. On to the 6 main districts. The Arena District is the home of the titular faction. Not much else to speak of beyond the statues of Mora House and St. Alicia, although Pelinal Whitestrake's absent. The Arboretum houses statues to the 9 Divines, with Talos at the center. The Temple District houses the Temple of the One, although at least this one actually houses people. The Talos Plaza District is the wealthiest part of town, with large manors. After that is the Elven Gardens, named so for the Elven Gardens in the alleyways.
Whose decision was it to line an alleyway with tons of shrubs?
And the Market District, the only place in Cyrodiil where you'll easily be able to find a merchant for everything. Let's take a step back and look at it another way. Is the Imperial City impressive for an Oblivion city? The answer is yes. The city is home to roughly 1/5 of the named NPCs in Cyrodiil, and unlike before, the vast majority of these NPCs live daily lives involving routine eating, sleeping, and recreation. So while the Imperial City is actually smaller than Vivec both in physical size and population, it feels more lively seeing so many people walking around at different times of day. My only complaint about the city would be its island. Not filling the entire island with a city, fine, I'll accept that. But not even for disparate farms or Imperial Legion camps or anything? I would kill to own a farm within walking distance of a major metropolitan area. There's simply no way. It's not possible. This island has to be full of people. The Mages Guild questline from here on is a linear questline. We get 4 quests from Raminus, and after that we have 7 quests from the Archmage Hannibal Traven himself. We're going to dive deep into the morality of playing with other people's dead relatives. But first we have to get our mage's staff. Don't worry, as the necromancers have decided to wipe out Wellspring Grove where the staves are made.
What have we here? Another plaything? You'll dance for me, little one. Yes, you will. I will make your corpse dance, and then tear itself apart.
Most of the quest lines in Oblivion revolve around the factions being at odds with some other unjoinable faction. I mentioned this in the Fighters Guild with the Blackwood Company and the Arena with the Yellow Team. Here, it's the Necromancers. The only problem is that this faction conflict is an ideological divide, unlike the previous two which had monetary motivations. The thing is, ideological faction divisions tend to be more interesting settings for stories, provided the story in question explores the antagonistic faction. Morrowind would do this by having the faction conflicts include factions that the player could choose between. The Mages Guild versus House Telvanni. The Mages Guild is a top-down bureaucratic establishment which utilizes Imperial law to expand their sphere of influence. They believe in controlling the magical population for the benefit of the magical and non-magical. House Telvanni is a libertarian society with little need or desire for regulation. The core of their ideological beliefs are that might makes right and that magic is the path to becoming powerful. And we see both factions' modus operandi. The Mages Guild has quests that involves dues collection, recruiting freelance wizards, and performing primary research. House Telvanni has quests that involve finding artifacts, performing menial errands, and defending the house. We also see both sides stoop to match the other. House Telvanni makes appeals to fairness to prevent the Mages Guild from monopolizing Redoran territory, and the Mages Guild can potentially resolve the conflict by sending the player to assassinate the Telvanni leadership. Now let's compare the Mages Guild of Oblivion to the Order of the Black Worm. The Mages Guild is characterized as being a busybody organization that rarely performs meaningful functions for society. Their saving grace is that they are morally better than a literal death cult that is actively murdering people, stealing their souls, and enslaving their corpses to further torment their victims. They have only one stated objective, the complete destruction of the Mages Guild, and it can be assumed they will not stop once they've done that. Dangerous death cults can be interesting, but I think a good rule of thumb is to only have one per game. Someone should have realized that the Mythic Dawn is already filling that niche in far more interesting and developed ways, and that having the Necromancers attempt to share space with them in that front was a bad idea. I think it's more appropriate to just have the Order of the Black Worm operating as a more generalized cult. The heart of the Necromancer conflict in broader Elder Scrolls is really about the bounds of reasonable magical regulation. The story started in Daggerfall with a faction called the Necromancers, led by Mannimarco, the King of Worms, and former owner of the Necromancer's Amulet. He was one of the leaders who the player could give the Totem of Tiber Septim, and as the book Where Were You When the Dragon Broke details, Mannimarco, like all the others, somehow canonically received the totem and achieved his ending. It's actually funny that this book isn't in Oblivion considering its relevance. Oblivion did come with the book Mannimarco, King of Worms. It details the history between Mannimarco and Vanus Galerion, the founder of the Mages Guild, and it's an alchemy skill book for some reason. Anyways, Mannimarco. Using the Totem of Tiber Septim, he underwent apotheosis and gained divinity, which is emblemized by the Necromancer's moon, which will occasionally block out the body of Arcane, one of the divines who represents death. The Necromancer conflict would be on pause during Morrowind, although interesting to note, Morrowind was apparently one of the few provinces in Tamriel to outright ban the practice of necromancy. Although it bears mentioning that the Dunmer practice ancestral worship and various necromantic rituals, and the law mostly pertained to performing necromancy on Dunmer corpses. Morrowind was also the game that introduced Conjuration to the series. Conjuration is the art of summoning Daedra. However, in Morrowind and Oblivion, this included the undead. This can be confusing, so let's elaborate on why this is. Conjuring the undead was meant as a stand-in for actual necromancy. When a necromancer is exposed to the Balmora Mages Guild, she offers to teach the player a necromancy spell to keep them quiet, which is a choice between two summon spells. This is because Reanimate as an effect wouldn't exist until Oblivion, and even in Oblivion it was only available through a single staff or a power in the Shivering Isles expansion. Full-blown necromancy wouldn't become available to the player until Skyrim, one of its few genuine contributions to magic in the series. But once reanimation was available to the player, well, conjuring the undead was taken away, at least until the Creation Club came along and Bethesda reanimated a dead Skyrim. Now, what's broken about this explanation is that the way you acquire spells to conjure the dead is from Mages Guild members, including members who get killed by necromancers. It's just sloppy that the mechanics surrounding necromancy stayed vague when Bethesda was intent on telling a story about necromancy. In a theoretical second pass, the conflict could be explored better. Maybe the player can acquire real necromancy spells, but only if they join the Order of the Black Worm. You lose access to support from most schools of magic to practice purely one. I understand the desire to tell the necromancy story. The game is set in the home of the Mages Guild, and Mannimarco is at odds with them. But it's like the designer forgot the whole reason Mannimarco is here in the first place is because the player could support the necromancers in Daggerfall. Anyways, we got the material and we went and got our staff enchanted. We get a choice in a few effects: Fire, Frost, Shock, Charm, Paralysis, Silence, Dispel, Soul Trap, and Telekinesis. Fire is a valid choice for the questline considering we're about to fight a lot of undead. Frost is, for that reason, a bad choice. Shock does not yet have the property of sapping magicka, so it doesn't really have special use as an anti-spellcaster weapon. Charm isn't very useful, and it would definitely be wasteful considering Paralysis as an option. Paralysis is difficult to cast and difficult to find on weapons. For this reason, it's one of the few I went with. There's also Silence, which is a valid choice considering there's quite a few spellcasters in the game. Soul Trap is, in my opinion, simply a waste because the effect runs far too long to be efficient. Telekinesis isn't a good option for my Atronac character due to quirks or bad design with the effect, but it is definitely a great choice for thieves. A problem with the quest, however, is that staves are leveled. This means the optimal level to complete this quest is 15, as the staves will be at their most powerful. If you get a staff early, then level up, the staff will become less useful. Essentially, this means that for pure mage characters who want to start with their faction but want to get the most use out of their staff of choice, they're going to need to grind some levels. This also means if you start as a warrior or a thief and do the Mages Guild last, you're getting a better reward than mages who started with it first. After we get our staff, Ramanis sends us to Skingrad to retrieve a book from the Count. The Count of Skingrad doesn't hold court, so to meet him we need to arrange an appointment. However, we're told that the Count doesn't want to meet with us, and his secretary suggests trying tomorrow. No, really, 24 hours have to pass. Then, Mercator tells us that the Count will meet us outside town at 2 in the morning. It's 11 now, so that's another 15 hours that have to pass. Only, it turns out that Mercator is a necromancer and has ambushed us with his 2 buddies. Then the Count comes in and helps me beat them to death with our fists. He calls us a fool for believing the Count would want to meet us out here, which is just...
Do you not recognize a necromancer when you see one?
Yeah, man, if they're wearing the black robes, but not if they're dressed like a noble working in a castle and I'm directed to speak with them to arrange an appointment. If you're going to call the player an idiot for falling into a trap, you should endeavor to not have that be literally the only path forward in a quest. The Count was either tailing Mercator constantly or was aware that we were here and let us walk into the trap anyways. Now that might make sense and even be a good plot point if he was using us to bait out the other necromancers. But he wasn't. He shows up to the meeting because, narratively, he needed to show up to establish his character for later. But if he was really aware of what was going on, then surely in the 39 hours I had to wait in Skingrad before this meeting, he would have approached us directly or sent us a message. The meeting isn't the only thing he knows that he shouldn't. He also knows the real purpose of our mission was to determine if Count Hassador had picked a side in the conflict. Effectively, the guild has just sent the player to die, because if the Count was on the side of the necromancers, he would have killed us. But what was supposed to happen if he wasn't? We ask him for the book and he asks us what we're talking about. Or what about if he was on the side of the necromancers but decided that this wasn't the moment to expose his allegiance? I guess the guild figures the player just has a punchable enough face that makes every necromancer who sees it want to kill us, which, well, fair enough, that's how it's gone every other time so far. Now obviously I didn't point out how silly it was to send the player as a courier when the Mages Guild can summon Dremora for that work, as this was more than a fetch quest. Or send a note to the Skingrad Mages Guild and dispatch them to do it. We return to Ramanis, who apologizes.
Saved you, did he? Well, that's a good sign. I must apologize. It was never the Council's intention to put you in harm's way.
Really? Then how was I... Is he lying to me? Is every party secretly master manipulators putting on the guise of being morons? Like, yeah, you didn't warn us he was a vampire. That's not the problem. That's a red herring to the real issue of what you just asked us to do. But it turns out alright as we receive the Spelldrinker Amulet, which provides spell absorption at a leveled value. This, paired with our 50% spell absorption as part of the Atronac sign, puts us at almost 70% spell absorption. We're gonna go higher, but even this value alone basically invalidates most of the necromancers as threats. Our next task from Ramanis sends us to one of the council members, who says that the necromancers have taken over one of the Mages Guild dig sites and we're to rescue them. Does that sound like a good quest? Because it's not actually it. We're just being sent to help clear out a blocked passage, and at no point do the necromancers comes up. This seems to be a point of contention among critics.
Story-wise, every faction in Oblivion usually begins with the player receiving odd jobs before some primary conflict is introduced between another faction or group. And from that point, the quests all focus on that conflict.
That's just not true. Not just for the Mages Guild, but any of the factions in Oblivion. Nor do I think it should be the case. The Fighters Guild in Morrowind starts its overarching story from the third quest you get in Balmora, yet has plenty of quests that are the Fighters Guild being the Fighters Guild. If the entire questline was focused on that story, then I firmly believe the Morrowind Fighters Guild would have been much, much worse off as a faction. The player needs to see the factions operating at normal capacity in order to appreciate just what it is they're even fighting for. And just because you're undergoing a crisis doesn't mean you can shirk your responsibilities. The Necromancers are a threat, but they aren't one that can be immediately extinguished, just like the Blackwood Company. We don't know the location or even identities of its members, or the full extent of their infiltration into the Mages Guild. It's not like we can pull these archaeologists off their project to help deal with the problem, because at this stage, we wouldn't have a use for them, so they continue their expedition of this Ayleid ruin, business as usual. The problem the researchers have run into is not a caved-in hallway, but a chamber with a pillar that responds to magic. The puzzle's rather simple. You give a translation book to one of the researchers and then read off the inscriptions on the wall. Each inscription refers to a magical effect, which, when cast in clockwise order, opens the way. The big issue with this puzzle is the lack of clues that suggest you follow a clockwise order. That may make sense to us, people who have grown up with analog clocks and are used to clockwise being a standard method of following a circular pattern, but does it make sense in a setting where the clock hasn't been invented? It's not actually a problem for me that the mages here haven't solved this basic puzzle yet. Sometimes gamers forget that normal people may die.
Best to play it safe. No complex magic. Stick to basic spells with single effects.
How haven't you figured this out yet?
All I can say for sure is that it reacts to magic. Badly most of the time. Several mages were hurt attempting to cast spells at it. It's at the bottom of the ruins, if you wish to try your luck. Be careful, though. It could be quite hazardous to your health. Best to play it safe. No complex magic.
In fact, it's fairly understandable. There's nothing to actually indicate that anything worthwhile is inside the pillar. These are Ayleid researchers who would know that Ayleids intentionally use a lot of traps in their cities to kill outsiders. From their perspective, this could be just a giant magical dildo that spits lightning at interlopers, with a pedestal inside that has a tablet carved with the likeness of a butt on it, solely to waste time. Or maybe the pillar requires the caster to be Ayleid. This is a setting with racial magic after all. In addition, if it's the narrative that the Mages Guild is full of unambitious bureaucrats, quite well that this character gave up at the first obstacle to progress. Salt's criticism that the researchers have all the scrolls on site to complete the puzzle is valid, just for the wrong reason. Imagine that, instead of these randos, we're greeted by members of the Cheydinhal Mages Guild. The characterizations are the same, the plot's the same, the characters are just different. And instead of having a chest full of scrolls, one of them is a spell teacher. They have a lot of red herring spells, but they happen to have all the spells you need on hand. Now, instead of using disposable scrolls that any character can use, you have to actually cast magic to solve the puzzle. I would also add 2 additional voice lines, because that's all you need. One would be that Scaleel, who is now Deetsan from the Recommendation quest, has decided for safety reasons to disallow any further testing of magic on the pillar as a guild member was killed. The other line would be for Denel, the translator, who would suggest from his study of the Ayleids that we may know the effects, but the pattern could be random, and offers to teach us a spell absorption spell to help protect us from the pillar while we experiment. The quest now requires that we go behind the back of Deetsan, someone who has helped us before, and after we succeed, she may even threaten to report us for not following her instructions to the letter, because remember, we're telling a story about a Mages Guild that has lost focus on the point of research and has become embroiled in petty politics and egoism. The other half of the time spent on this quest is a standard Ayleid ruin, subsection Undead Variety, particularly 8 of these wraiths. Fighting them is more tedious than difficult due to the fact that I can absorb their magic and easily dodge their melee attacks, but they are built like tanks.
I love the undead. I try to use them as much as possible. Just bring in one of these guys, pop them down.
We get our hands on an ancient elven helmet. They could have specified Ayleid, but whatever, and return to Chorrol to finish the quest. Our reward is the Robe of the Conjurer. Now, it's somewhat worthless to discuss clothing as most of it's decorative. Unlike Morrowind, you can't wear clothes under your armor, and there's no unarmored skill. The only gameplay advantage is spell effectiveness, which can only reach 100% of the players unarmored. The changes to the armor system have had an impact on the number of articles of clothing the player can wear. You don't have as many options to combo or layer clothing, which is more than cosmetic considering enchantments. Robes are actually inferior to a shirt and pants combination because the latter provides more slots for enchantment. Males can no longer wear skirts, so the Imperial purple skirts of Morrowind are gone. The Mythic Dawn robes that I want to wear go further by taking up the gloves and shoes slots as well. The best combination I found was the dark shirt, the black wide pants, a black hood, and a generic pair of shoes, and the wrist irons you start the game with. This combination works because it will only weigh 1 pound, the downside is that it looks awful. Spell effectiveness is a multiplier to the power of the spell effect, so 90% on a 100-point fire spell would do 90 damage instead of 100. However, it's not really the biggest deal in terms of spellcasting unless you are a high-level illusion mage. Illusion's magic magnitude is tied directly to NPC levels, which scale. Past level 25, you need 100% spell effectiveness to be able to use illusion magic, which is only possible if unarmored. But the unarmored skill was removed after Morrowind. Unarmored is a contentious skill among Morrowind min-maxers, largely because you miss out on a bunch of potential enchanting slots, but it was important that unarmored characters, in patched versions of the game anyways, could have armor ratings, specifically for non-magical unarmored classes like pugilists. I believe the expectation is that the unarmored Oblivion player would use alteration, magic, and enchantments to supplement their armor ratings. Shield effects do provide a noticeable increase in defensive stats, but they have the downside of further limiting the number of enchantment slots the player has. I prioritized using Fortify Magicka effects to help deal with how few times the player can cast spells before running out of Magicka in Oblivion. This opens the enchanting can of worms. There are 3 ways the player can enchant. First is to bust out the wallet to purchase and/or install Frostcrag Spire. You go to the Mystic Emporium in the Imperial City Market District and purchase the necessary materials to build an enchanter. Then you acquire a soul. The more powerful the donor, the more powerful the effect. Finally, you pay a sizable sum of money at the enchanting station, and you now have an enchanted item. The second way is to gain access to the same enchanting station after you do your 7 recommendation quests and join the university. Or, you use a sigil stone. Sigil stones are earned at the end of Oblivion gates, which start opening around Cyrodiil after you visit Kvatch in the main quest. The sigil stone's effect is randomly determined when you close the gate at the end, so you can endlessly save scum to repeat the final sequence until you get the desired stone. The stones are, however, leveled, with the most powerful of them appearing at and after level 17. You simply use the stone, select your item, and get either the offensive effect on weapons or the defensive effect on armor. The sigil stones are a limited supply. There are only 60 Oblivion gates, meaning 60 chances, and once you use the stone, it disappears. So, if you refuse to save scum, you're going to have to do a lot of Oblivion gates to get the desired effect. And Oblivion, well, we'll detail the problems with Oblivion during the main quest. The end of the main quest also means prematurely ending access to Oblivion as well. Even if you do get the desired sigil stone, in our case Fortify Magicka, you have to get it multiple times to fill all the slots, which means more Oblivion runs or... Alright, so there was a point where I broke down and started using macros to level. There was a similar point where I decided to use a certain glitch as well. The scroll duplication glitch is a fairly bizarre glitch where if the player selects a scroll they have multiples of and then drops a different item, it will duplicate those items to the number of scrolls the player has. So if I select a 100 stack of scrolls and drop 10 potions, I will get 10 stacks of 10 potions totaling 100. I don't really understand the technical how of this glitch. I'm sure someone will explain it and then post a link to an explanation I could have spent several hours looking for. Obviously, this falls outside the bounds of an immersive playthrough. The difference between this and using the console is just time saving finding the reference ID. Look, I tried to play the game without cheating, for integrity and all that, and it lasted about 15 hours. If the player decides against sigil stones for any valid reason, they still have the option of standard enchanting, although even Grand Souls will result in a weaker effect value. Now, you might think that Grand Souls would be the most difficult to come by, but the most difficult soul to get is the relatively weaker Greater Soul. See, Oblivion added Black Soul Gems, the creation of which we'll get access to in this questline, which enables us to capture the souls of people. This always results in a Grand Level soul, even if the soul in question belonged to a starving, homeless beggar. And since the generic bandit population outnumbers the normal civilians, it's not like you have to murder an actual character to get them. And no one in the Mages Guild will even bust you for turning people into weapons. Personally, I think that nameless NPCs, if you have to have them, should result in only a greater level Black Soul Gem. Black Soul Gems are a shortcut to creating powerful items because they allow you to get around the need to soul trap powerful white soul-bearing creatures, so it should come with the cost of sacrificing named NPCs for this cause. Sure, metagamers would just rush to soul trap all the named NPCs that die in the quest, but at least it would make Black Soul Gems require some actual evil on the part of the player. Also, because soul gems are now buried in the UI, it's hard to keep track of what gems you have and need to fill, so you might end up filling a valuable Grand Soul Gem with a Petty Soul because you didn't realize you were out of the Petty Gems. As stated, however, Grand level enchantments are generally weaker than their sigil stone counterparts, although custom enchantments do allow you to have multiple effects. So the comparison looks like this. Sigil stones are tedious to acquire, there's a limited supply, they have leveled values, and they're randomized. Grand souls are easier to acquire, but cost gold to use, have a weaker effect, but a custom effect at the same time. The upsides of enchanted equipment is too great even for the most die-hard of orc barbarians to pass up. And I think sigil stones were meant as a means for non-magic characters to access the benefits. So, let's go over the spell effects that a player can enchant their armor to possess, and since spellcrafting is in the name of this section as well. Alteration. Burden and Feather are both effects which impact encumbrance. It's strange to hear people complaining about encumbrance when Feather and Fortify Strength are both effects that exist in the game. And then again, Feather and Strength in general were cut from Skyrim. Burden, which has a similar effect to drain or damage strength, allows you to offensively encumber somebody, although most people don't carry enough equipment to be noticeably affected. Still, it's a good tool to have in the arsenal, as NPCs can use it to suddenly throw an unexpected wrench in the player's plans if they're redlining their own inventory. Shield, as previously stated, is used to increase the target's armor rating. Armor works a bit differently in Oblivion than Morrowind, however. It's now effectively a percentage that determines the physical damage absorbed and caps at 85%. So there's no point in going over 85 points of shield, and you can get away with less the more or better armor you wear. Fire, Frost, and Lightning Shield all operate the same way. It's basically a shield and a resistance effect rolled into one spell with a slightly higher base cost. Water Breathing and Water Walking provide fairly obvious effects, although it's worth noting one thing. The ability to enchant items to cast spells has been removed from Oblivion, so instead of enchanting a ring to cast Water Walking for 45 seconds, a Water Walking enchantment is now just a constant effect. In Morrowind, a certain playstyle was possible where you could get items like the Ring of Toxic Cloud, which would cast a ranged poison spell that exploded on impact. It's a ring, so it weighs almost nothing and has the benefit of being reusable, unlike a scroll. Players could collect these items and create a very powerful character with very low encumbrance. There are no downsides to this playstyle, as enchanted items would passively regenerate their charge in Morrowind. I feel the designers really wanted to nerf this playstyle, but they used a bunch of different solutions that had a way bigger impact than nerfing the jewelry collectors. The first was to remove passive enchantment charge regeneration, meaning items have to be recharged with soul gems or add an enchanting services provider. Given the cost of enchanting, using soul gems to recharge items was their primary use in Morrowind, and it served as a fast way to keep your items going in a fight. Removing passive recharge means the player now has to soul trap, or spend money to keep getting use out of their enchanted items. That's fine for a custom enchantment job because that likely means the player is already magically inclined, but not for something like the Wabbajack. If players aren't going to soul trap, then they have to spend 1 gold per point of charge to keep using their toys, which is extremely expensive, or they have to use Varla stones, which are extremely valuable and difficult to acquire and require running Iliad dungeons. However, another nerf was dished out. Enchanted items can no longer cast spells, so a Ring of Water Walking doesn't cast Water Walking for 30 seconds, but now provides the effect as long as the player wears it. Constant effect items existed in Morrowind, and creating custom constant effects was the end goal of every player using the enchanting system, something you had to work hard towards. Now it's the only option, and a lot of the fun has been removed. Granted, they did fix the infinitesimally small chance of hand enchanting by cutting it from the game, and they fixed the superbly high cost of enchanting at a service provider by turning them into lectarns and hiding them behind a paywall and a locked gate. Anyways, Open is the magical player's alternative to lockpicking and is tiered into very easy, average, hard, and very hard lock effects. Oblivion made a change to the lock system, which was to have lock level 100 correspond to requiring a key. In Morrowind, if you had the skills and or tools, you could open any lock, and it wasn't hard to have a high enough security or alteration skill to do so. Oblivion would introduce the trend of creating locks the player was incapable of opening without any mention of a key, because there is a possibility that the player might find a chest or door ahead of time and break a quest sequence, and rather than accounting for that, it's way easier to just slap a requires key sticker on it and move on. The lock spell was also cut from the game, although it does exist in the construction set. This was probably because the spell would break Radiant AI, and rather than simply having the AI call for help and a nearby guard unlocking the door, they just cut the spell. Lock was a neat spell. Its main use was usually security training, although the lock spell you buy is also useful for macro alteration training. Oh, yeah. And since the AI couldn't open locked doors, you could trap them in rooms and hit them with explosions you shot at the door. I can see them wanting to fix that. Sure, it's just a shame the fix was a cut. And speaking of cuts, jump, slow fall, swift swim, and of course levitate. Jump was probably cut because it was superfluous with Fortify Acrobatics, even though it wasn't and worked in a separate way. and even then the game makes damn sure to limit how hard you can fortify acrobatics. Funny how we went from finding a scroll to jump across the map to nervous that high-level acrobatics players might realize you can jump up to the end of Vilverin at this ledge near the beginning. Swift Swim. It didn't have a lot of things going for it in Morrowind, but that was bad balancing, because it was better to use Fortify Speed than Swift Swim. Just make Swift Swim cheap to use, but obviously ineffective on land, and it's balanced. But no, just cut it. Slow Fall was an easy way for mages to mitigate fall damage, which isn't a problem in Oblivion as dungeons and even open areas are very rarely designed vertically. And they were probably worried someone would slow fall off Castle Skingrad into the walled part of the city and break the illusion, which is definitely why Levitate was cut from the game. Even though areas where levitation effects are magically negated do exist in the setting and were used in Mournhold for the express purpose of preventing players from flying out of the city, but again, areas in Oblivion are very rarely designed vertically, so even if you did have the effect, it's not like you would ever actually get to use it. Still, it would be fun to be able to levitate up mountains or across rivers. Just say that cities and dungeons and Oblivion gates use suppressants to inhibit levitation magic, or make it so that responsible people witnessing you levitate gives you a bounty. It's illegal, so maybe we have to track down Dovin or Rain, a former levitation trainer who lost his passion after the spell was banned from the Empire. Man, I can't help but imagine how Levitate might have helped the Emperor here. Conjuration. Conjuration has one enchant effect, which is Turn Undead. It makes undead lower than the spell level run away from the player. I continue to be amazed that among all the cuts that happen to the magic of Elder Scrolls, Turn Undead has managed to survive it all. Conjuration's remaining effects are to bind equipment and summon creatures. Binding weapons in Oblivion has always seemed like a meme to me. Like in Morrowind, you can make a Redguard spec in Longblade in Conjuration, and get him a bound longsword spell that he has a 93% chance of successfully casting in less than 15 minutes. But in Oblivion, weapons are leveled to your conjuration, so a novice is stuck with a dagger, then at conjuration level 25 they can get an axe, then at conjuration 50 they can get a mace and a bow, and at 75 they can get a claymore. It's the same thing with the armor. You get the boots, gauntlets, and helmet at novice, the greaves at 25, the chest at 50, and the shield of all things at 75. Bear in mind, your other reward for getting to expert was a two-handed sword, so no sword and board for conjuration players anymore. I think the concept of summoning your equipment's pretty cool, so I'm glad it exists, even if it's a mangled victim of the Oblivion balancing act. What's even weirder is that someone at Bethesda clearly likes binding equipment, as evidenced by the Mythic Dawn entering combat by binding their armor. And its terrible Oblivion implementation didn't see it getting cut from Skyrim, so I don't understand why players are expected to switch from blade to blunt and back to blade again in order to use the bound weapons. Creature summoning is actually mostly the same as it was in Morrowind. There's a couple new creatures like the Lich and the Spider Daedra, but also a few that got taken away like the Ogrims and Winged Twilights. You can also only start summoning creatures at Conjuration 25, meaning that Turn Undead and Bound Dagger have to do if you don't make it a major skill. I like creature summoning, since it means you can outsource some of the Oblivion combat to a minion, but it comes with quirks. Using the default spells, a summoned Scamp costs 60 magicka for 20 seconds. A summoned Flame Atronak costs 135 magicka for 30 seconds. A summoned Frost Atronak costs 360 magicka for 35 seconds. These spell costs are pretty insane, especially if you have the Atronak birth sign and don't naturally regenerate magicka. Morrowind summons were expensive as well, but that was because all the default spells lasted a full minute. I don't know why we're making the more powerful summons last longer, since that's just going to balloon the spell cost, and the first thing any smart player would do is create custom versions of their desired summon that only last 20 seconds. Destruction. Destruction has a lot of effects, so I'll try to be brief here. Damage effects last until a restore effect is used. Drain effects last until the effect expires. Disintegrate does damage to the health of items, and weakness lowers the resistance values. Fire, Frost, and Shock are basically interchangeable in terms of effect and cost, but with the differences depending on the target's resistances. All of these are used for weapons, which means they are all cast on strike. Enchanted weapons are necessary for min-maxing the amount of damage you can do, but don't work as well for general use because they have to be recharged by hand. Now, there isn't anything actually stopping the player from putting weakness to magic and drain fatigue on an item and permanently trapping them in place. Hell, that's how I kept the servant at Battlehorn Castle out of my bedroom. Destruction is the same as it was in Morrowind, minus poison damage, which now belongs to alchemy. Oblivion also broke the ability to combine a weakness spell and a damage spell into one and have it take full effect. Example given, weakness to magicka, 100 points, drain health, 100 points. In Morrowind, this would typically do 200 points of temporary health damage to NPCs with no magic resistance, usually killing them. This same spell in Oblivion will only do 100 points. I believe it has to do with the order the game internally applies the effects being backwards in Oblivion, where it applies the damage effect first and the weakness effect second. So to get full use out of weakness spells, you have to cast them first and then switch to your damage spell. Illusion. Illusion has 4 enchanting effects, as most of its effects are spell-oriented. Light creates, what else, a magical light source. It's actually better than its Morrowind counterpart, given the light more prominently affects the player's ability to sneak. However, it's somewhat unnecessary, as Oblivion isn't really a dark enough game to need the light effect. Skyrim would improve the light effect by allowing players to cast it at targets. Night Eye in turn allows the player to see in the dark without casting light, for stealth purposes.
Unfortunately, it turns everything blue.
Then there's Invisibility and Chameleon. You can't enchant items with invisibility, as the effect would expire as soon as you interact with something, and you would have to constantly re-equip the item. You can, however, enchant items with Chameleon. The difference is largely the same as in Morrowind. Invisibility makes you undetectable until you interact with something. Chameleon allows you to interact, but is more expensive. In Morrowind, if you were under the Chameleon effect and attempted to speak to an NPC, you could potentially fail and suffer a disposition loss. I assume to simulate the NPCs not recognizing who the player is, or maybe getting spooked. This was removed. The player can freely chat with anyone at Chameleon level 100. In fact, Chameleon level 100 is... we'll talk about it later. Silence is an effect that prevents spellcasting. However, an improvement for Morrowind was made to the cost. Also, why is it called Silence if spellcasting is non-verbal in Elder Scrolls? Paralyze was equally effective to Silence at the same cost and more universally useful. Now Paralyze is much more expensive with a lower duration, so Silence can actually fill its niche as an anti-spellcaster tool. The problem with Silence is, and will continue to be, the spellcaster AI, as they simply never make effective use of magic. So going out of your way to equip and cast a Silence spell will never be preferable to just doing damage, which is why Silence was removed from Skyrim. Why fix something when you could just cut it instead? Calm, Charm, Demoralize, Frenzy, and Rally are all spells which affect various values that belong to NPCs, with pretty obvious effects. The problem that was inherited into Skyrim is that because the effect has a level variable which caps, and levels can raise beyond that cap, illusion spells can drop off in viability after a certain point. If the player stops using illusion spells and passes into a new level bracket, they may find their old spells no longer work. Or they may not be skilled enough to cast the new spells and have to grind some levels to catch back up. Calm can be useful for ending fights, but unlike Morrowind, there are no hostiles that are worth calming down. Example given would be Chorrol, a hostile Altmer mage who is also the master enchanting trainer in Morrowind. You could also calm any normal bandit and then use Persuasion to intimidate them into no longer being hostile. Generic Oblivion bandits, even when calm, won't talk to you, and using the spell to end fights with town NPCs you don't want to kill is unnecessary, as Oblivion added the ability to yield. Seeing as calm is now just a combat spell for a slightly higher base cost, you could instead use Demoralize, which causes NPCs to run away in fear. The only time this would be a disadvantage is if the NPC runs further into the dungeon and draws the attention of all its friends. These spells seem to fit the niche of the stealth player who wants to continue using stealth after being caught, or a normal person who doesn't want to fight all the woodland creatures. Then there's Frenzy. Frenzy exists to start fights. I believe the idea was that you could use Frenzy in a group of enemies to cause infighting, but in reality, Frenzy gets used as a free murder pass in Morrowind and Oblivion. I don't actually mind at all that Frenzy is considered assault in Skyrim, as Frenzy has 0 downsides as is. And I never got a frenzied enemy to actually become an ally, they usually just end up targeting me anyways. Rally is a spell I've never understood the usage of. Enemies in Morrowind generally didn't run away unless you got somewhere they couldn't pathfind to, and I've only noticed enemies in Oblivion fleeing because they were trying to utilize ranged magic. Skyrim was really the first game to implement widespread enemies running away dynamically, so I guess Illusion was the baby of the AI designer. Commando is a spell that was taken from Conjuration and placed into illusion magic, which is honestly fair enough. In Morrowind, it could be utilized to move NPCs around, moving a merchant into the player's home. The more complex AI scripting means that even if you try to relocate an NPC, they'll just go home when the effect ends, appropriately angry at your magical manipulation. You can also use command magic to force enemies to fight for you. Sadly, command was another spell that got cut come Skyrim for no apparent reason. Overall, illusion magic is fairly versatile, but it does a bad job of selling itself because most of the lower level effects are pretty weak and it can be pretty easy to outlevel the skill. Mysticism. Rest in peace. Mysticism has a short list of effects. Detect Life has had a genuine improvement over its Morrowind counterpart, showing an on-screen effect instead of indicating the detections on the minimap. Telekinesis has also improved. It allows the player to manipulate objects remotely, but is more dynamic and allows the player to move objects around the environment. Soul Trap applies an effect that, when the target dies, captures their soul in a soul gem. Reflect Spell, Reflect Damage, and Spell Absorption are a little more complicated. Spell Absorption is a chance that converts points of magic damage into magicka. The Atronak trades passive magicka regeneration for 50% spell absorption, meaning a 50% chance a spell's effect is absorbed into magicka. Reflect Spell is another chance, which reflects a spell effect back onto the caster. Reflect Damage is a new effect, which reflects a percentage of physical damage taken back onto the caster. Unlike the latter two effects, this is guaranteed to occur for each melee strike. It would be neat if the AI recognized that it was damaging itself and switched to a bow to compensate. Oh well. The designers seemed cognizant that these effects were unusually powerful enchantments, given that Martin will comment if you give him Spellbreaker, which has a 30% reflect spell.
Not many people would give up Spellbreaker for destruction, my friend. Your sacrifice honors me.
We'll have more to say on these later as our characters develops. The final mysticism effect is Dispel, which removes active magical effects. This is only effects from spells, but can be positive or negative. You can use the spell to dismiss enemy summons, for example, or to remove an absorb effect from yourself. It's a good idea. The only problem are the enemy spellcasters. A spell effect usually isn't going to be on you long enough for you to stop and dispel it, because most enemies will use magicka inefficient, quick burning spells that'll be over before you can dispel them. And, well, there's the ever-present issue. If I'm going to be casting magic at an enemy, why not just cast a spell that does damage to them instead? Magic users generally aren't durable enough to actually require thinking about disabling their magic. Now it's time for the cuts. Absorb effects have been moved to Restoration, making its long list of effects even longer. Almsavie and Divine Intervention have been cut. Detect Enchantment and Detect Key have been cut. Mark and Recall have been cut. With only 7 spells to its name, by the time Skyrim came around, Mysticism had been cut. Restoration. Restoration has the most obvious effects in the game. Restore heals, resist resists, fortify fortifies, cure cures, and absorb absorbs. If fire damage is the bread of destruction, restore health is the butter of restoration. That's why they are the two default spells every Oblivion and Skyrim character ever has had. There's also the less popular restore fatigue. However, since power attacks are useless for the aforementioned reasons, the only thing drawing fatigue would be jumping around, so as long as the player stops doing that, the player will always be at a decent fatigue level, meaning they will always do mostly ideal damage. Resistances have been cut as spells, except for resist magic of all things. It's a shame too, as resistance spells could provide spontaneous defensive measures, like using resist fire in Oblivion gates, resist frost against necromancers, or resist poison against gobos. I think the idea was to encourage utilizing the elemental shields from Alteration, even though Restoration is the most universal skill. Fortifications are another interesting tool that has fallen by the wayside. I was always careful to use Fortify Health in Morrowind, as taking too much health damage and then losing the effect was the death sentence, although apparently in Oblivion that isn't the case, as it will leave you with just 1 health. Fortify skill and attributes are always memes, like using Fortify Speed to speed up escorts, or using Fortify Mercantile to max out your Mercantile for 3 seconds and then initiating a conversation. However, Bethesda did go out of their way to put some caps on their formulas, so getting to 10,000 intelligence and making potions worth thousands of gold is no longer possible. Cure spells continue to work as usual, although Cure Paralyze as a spell continues to boggle the mind. The problem with Cure Poison is that, unlike the player-created poisons, the poisons NPCs will use are almost always instant. Finally, Absorb spells. They've been stolen from Mysticism, as mentioned, and Bethesda never seemed to get Absorb health in a good spot, so they removed it as a spell in Skyrim unless you're a vampire. The problem with Absorb health isn't that it's bad, it's actually really good, so much so that it can overshadow the other offensive spell options. Sure, the spell's base cost is greater than damage, health, or fire damage, but it's not greater than those 2 spell effects combined with a healing spell. Absorb health is very powerful, and its only weakness is being tied to Restoration, the slowest magic skill to level. Spellcrafting. Okay, so I've basically given you a rundown of all of the magic in Oblivion. You can thank me later, because now we're going to talk about spellcrafting.
Things that could exist in the Wild West of 2006 game design, but never in today's AAA games.
Yeah, but why though? In reality, most magic in Oblivion boils down to increase number, decrease number, spawn thing, or freeze body if you're feeling advanced. Hell, the crazy part of Oblivion's spellcrafting are mostly just interactions with the new physics systems. A lot of what was hereditary for Morrowind was actually stifled in an attempt to balance the system out. For example, What's stopping me from creating a spell that uses all of my magicka but completely and utterly erases the enemy? Skill restrictions based on magicka cost. Because spell chance isn't in the game anymore, magicka costs have to be the balancing factor between spells. But rather than having that be decided by the player and their pool of available magicka, it's instead tiered into the system, and all roads lead to sitting in place casting one magicka spells to increase your skills to unlock better magic. In order to make a custom spell, you need to gain access to the spellcrafting table, join the Arcane University, or pay 1,000 gold to get one next to the enchanter at Frostcrag Spire. Morrowind was much more open to spellcrafting, allowing anyone to do so at the Mages Guild. To acquire effects, you need to learn a spell from a trainer. This is where I mentioned that you can't delete spell effects in Oblivion, meaning if you want to make a custom spell, you will have to first acquire a spell you will almost certainly never use again, and will thereafter have to scroll over it for the rest of the game. Spells fall into 3 categories: self, touch, and target. Target multiplies spell cost by 1.5 times, so I usually stick to touch spells for offense and self spells for defense. And it also costs less if the duration is higher, and we're working on a magicka economy here. I should mention spell tomes. This is an odd one. Back in the day, for $1, you could get this plugin that adds a bunch of books to the game that will teach the player spells. That ended up being the primary way spells are taught in Skyrim, so it's kind of weird that this is how the idea got its start. Of course, now it's packaged with the base game and it's inserted in such a way that many people might not even realize that it was downloadable content. Spell tomes just have a chance of replacing scrolls. There is a conjurer that will try and kill you carrying one, but that isn't even really necessary for you to start encountering them. When you use the tome, it will offer to teach you the spell in question. This is in varying shades of usefulness. Ironically, it's more useful in my Super Dungeon mod as a way of getting magic than it is in the actual game because, well, spellcrafting. There are a few effects you can only get through spell tomes, including Fortify Skill, Resist Disease, Resist Paralysis, Resist Poison, Resist Frost, Summon Bear, and Stunted Magicka, which is the effect that prevents magicka regeneration. And that's kind of weird, right? Morrowind had a problem with Fortify Skill breaking a bunch of stuff, so one of the base patches removed the only way you could get that effect from the base game. And then the first person you meet in the Tribunal DLC will teach you Fortify Skill spells. Then Oblivion comes around. It also doesn't give you the effect in the base game, but again, it will bundle the effect in with DLC. This reinforces my suspicion that there isn't any one person at Bethesda focused on magical mechanics. The thing is, right, what sticks out is the ways the effect can break the game, but you could also just use it to minorly augment your abilities. For instance, enchanting gear to fortify your blade so you increase your damage. A Grand Soul will buff your skill 10 points, which increased my damage with, say, Chill Rend from 16 to 18. The problem with spell tomes is that it's more spells that may potentially clutter the spell screen. Maybe if the spells were more magicka efficient, a couple are, but most of them are identical to what a custom spell would give you. There are also a bunch you can potentially find for pre-existing spells. It's a small DLC that I guess is kind of useful to magical playstyles. Maybe. I created a basic 1-2 punch. We start with Weakness to Fire 100% spell for a couple seconds that's quite cheap, and follow it up with a fire damage spell that does low damage over a long period of time. Even though the Weakness to Fire spell expires before the fire spell finishes, it will continue to do damage as though it is there. Hotkey to Weakness to 1, and the fire spell to 2, 1 cast, 2 cast, and then, I don't know, just beat them to death with your fists or something. Did you know that a 93% chameleon effect for 3 seconds is an apprentice level illusion spell? You can get up to 96 points of fortified mercantile for 3 seconds at apprentice as well. Hell, a novice can cast a 100 point charm effect for 3 seconds and impress every single NPC in the game. Honestly, even with its limited spell pool, custom spells in Skyrim had a lot of potential due to all the new additions to magic like the flamethrower effect, dual hand charging, cloak spells, and runes, and we lost all that because we decided to cut this entire system. When last we left off, we had gotten the robe of the Conjurer. Raminus Polus now asks us to try and get some information on the creation of Black Soul Gems. We're sent over to the archives to meet with Tarmina, who is angry at first but is more cooperative when we state our objective. It's good that not every character in the Mages Guild is characterized as being self-destructively up their own ass. We have to find the book, but don't worry because there's a quest marker to help us. This is something I don't get about the quest marker supporters, right? Okay, so they're supposed to help prevent bad directions. Yeah, let's pretend that's true. But what about this quest? You can't just let the player look through the library for the book? Is Bethesda worried that players will get bored, or worried that some players will complain when they miss the grayish-brown book on the brown table? I mean, they could have used a different, more obvious colored model for it. The book, Necromancer's Moon, details a celestial phenomenon called the Revenant, and states the purpose of black soul gems in the trapping of humanoid souls.
I am unfamiliar with the shade of the Revenant described within the book, but I was never one to dabble in the more, shall we say, amoral arts.
I wasn't aware astronomy was an amoral art. Actually, I'm curious how Tarmina even knows that's what it's called, considering it's referred to as the Revenant and the Necromancer's Moon in the book. Anyways, Raminis has no clue, so he sends us to the university astronomist Bothiel. She doesn't know what it is either, which... That's literally your job. The Necromancer's Moon has been a thing since the end of Daggerfall 16 years ago. She does at least remember that Falcar, the necromancer who had infiltrated the Cheydinhal Guildhall, had asked about the same thing, and he had left behind a note in a hurry. The note states 4 locations, one of which is literally called the Dark Fissure, and then states, altars have been raised, anchorites have been called, watch the skies. Once a week, his grace shines down on us. Okay, am I being pranked? When did Falcar research this information? We know it wasn't after we met him, because he's a murder suspect, unless Raminis didn't think to say something when a known necromancer came into the university to do some research. Why did Falcar write this note that would obviously implicate him and expose several important sites to his order? Why did Bothiel think it prudent to save this note, but not report this information to Raminis? Does she save all the paper scraps people leave behind? Does she not read them out of principle? How would she know which paper scrap belonged to whom? And once Falcar, again a known murderer and necromancer, was found out, why did Bothiel not see it prudent to further investigate the Revenant? Is Bothiel a necromancer? And why, when we bring this information to Raminis, does he know where the Dark Fissure is located? Is he a necromancer? The answer is no. Bothiel, Tarmina, and Raminis are not necromancers. They're just incompetent. Which might be interesting. It might give the player some pause for consideration during a future quest if they were approached with an offer to join the Necromancers. Raminis wants us to investigate further at the Dark Fissure, although you can technically go to any of the sites. The Dark Fissure is the only one which has a necromancer performing the ritual. Is that true? We can wait for the ritual to occur, or we can go into the cave and kill the anchorite and take a note detailing the ritual, or we can intuit the ritual ourselves. When the Revenant shines, a Grand Soul Gem is placed in the altar, and then Soul Trap is used on the altar, and that converts the gems over. We go back to Raminis, get an optional promotion to Magician, and are told that the Archmage is going to be giving us orders from now on. Before that, let's talk about the Orrery. This room is actually in the game, even if you don't load the DLC, and it looks like this. No, I don't know why the scale of the room is so large. Of all the DLC, the Orrery feels like cut content from Oblivion that got a second chance at life. Without it, you can't reach this empty room. With it, the door goes to a room which leads to another door that leads into the Orrery proper, but it's non-functional right now. So Bothiel decides to write a letter to a freshly escaped prisoner asking that they go out and retrieve the parts needed to make it go again. It would take until Skyrim for us to learn to level gate the DLC so the player isn't ambushed by 10 prompts as soon as they step out into the world. And then the Creation Club messed that up.
Don't worry though, they fixed it with Anniversary Edition. Now, instead the courier tracks you down 6 bajillion times to hand you letters because they couldn't just put the content in the world to let players find in their exploration game.
The quest is pretty simple. We go out and collect 4 Dwemer parts out in Colovia. The mod is kind of bare bones in that the pieces don't even have unique icons without a patch. When the Orrery operates, it offers us different powers based on the phases of the moons. Each power will boost one attribute by 20, but drain another by 20 as well for 60 seconds. Neat, but not really worth $2. Our first task from Traven is to intercept a group of battle mages en route to Ninyan Twill, and to ensure the protection of an undercover mole inside the ranks of the Necromancer cult.
There's no time to waste. Follow me.
Alright, but watch out for that obvious trap.
Funny scene. I suspect to counter the later scene where we find out the mole was turned into a zombie.
He's a worm thrall now, and shall be quite content here. A grim fate indeed. But one does not cross the Order of the Black Worm without suffering greatly for it.
That's the quest. Go in a ruin and kill necromancers. Before Traven will give us our next task, he insists we head downstairs and get a promotion from Raminus. So, I have all of the achievements on the Xbox copy of Oblivion, because I didn't have a functional PC for a couple years. Except I don't have one achievement, and that is the Magician rank of the Mages Guild, which is a completely optional promotion that you can miss. The only real purpose of faction ranks in Oblivion is achievements, something that would be easy to miss on PC where there aren't any.
It's kind of funny they never added achievements to the Steam copy of Oblivion, but we now have them in Reblivion as well. As long as you don't ever use console commands in Oblivion.
Now, faction ranks did have a purpose in Morrowind, and it was more than immersion. They helped to control the freeform quest structures of factions and came with disposition bonuses as well as detriments when dealing with opposing factions. Some NPCs would also restrict their services to only high-ranking members of their factions. Now, however, most of that's gone, and so come Skyrim, the faction ranks were gone as well. Traven next tells us that Count Hasseldor has requested we visit him to receive information on the Necromancers. His new assistant has us wait while she gets him. Honestly, why don't we just declare our arrival and meet with him in his awesome and unused throne room area? Count Hasseldor does have information for us, and in all honesty, likely had it the last time we met him, but now he has a task that needs doing. Count Hasseldor is a vampire, for those listening and unfamiliar with him. A pack of unrelated vampires recently moved into a nearby cave. He speculates attracted to his county by his success as a vampire. These vampires, however, have drawn the ire of the the Order of the Virtuous Blood. No, not even those guys, just a generic vampire hunter group. Anyways, Hasseldor wants both groups gone, and you're presented with a few options, surprisingly. The vampires have to die regardless, but you can kill, use, or dismiss the vampire hunters depending on how you approach the situation. Sure, it may just be 3 possibilities, but given everything so far, having options is, well, refreshing. After a lot of foot tapping waiting for the Count, he comes and shares the information he has.
Mannimarco has returned.
I might have spoiled that already, but oh well. Is this supposed to be a dramatic reveal? What, for all the people who played Daggerfall, read Where Were You When the Dragon Broke in Morrowind, and remembered Mannimarco's name and significance? It's a minor thing, but I just love that half of the footage of me talking to the Archmage starts with him waking up in his bedroom. No wonder he's full of bad ideas, he keeps having to make quick decisions immediately after waking up. This news shakes him, and he says the council needs a few days to come up with a course of action, and of course, to move a couple NPCs around for future quests. So, after an arena fight, 2 different Oblivion gates, and an update to my gear, Traven still hasn't come to a decision, but he does need us to check up on the Bruma Guild Hall. It's been wiped out, there are bodies everywhere, the undead, and a necromancer. That's pretty bold, and pretty stupid. People emotionally resonate with this quest because this was the guild hall with the guys who like to play pranks, and they've just been killed. And while I agree that the faction quest of Oblivion should have featured more moments like this is also superbly silly. Archmage Traven suspects something is wrong because Jean Frasserick, the woman who recommended us, stopped sending him correspondences for several days. Nobody knew anything was wrong at the Bruma Guild Hall until that point. For several days, the fires, the smell of dead bodies, the sounds of combat and screaming, and the parade of necromancers as they entered the city, all of that was ignored. And for several days, nobody attempted to enter the guild hall, because it's not like the Mages Guild provides services to the public. Alright, let's doctor this quest.
Warlock, I'm glad you are back. Minutes ago a courier arrived. I was expecting my daily correspondence with Jean, but instead, I received a worrying report from the captain of the Bruma Guard that our guild hall was attacked. We're stretched then, so I need you to head to Bruma and find out what's going on.
Are you from the Mages Guild? Good, your guild hall was attacked. They snuck into the city claiming to be a Thether troop and attempted to escape using magic. One of the guards heard commotion, and we mobilized as quickly as we could, but only managed to trap a couple of them inside the guild hall. I'm not risking my men if I do not have to, so get in there.
Bam. It's that easy. Now we've made the Bruma Mages Guild an actual part of the broader city of Bruma, instead of a microcosm where a bunch of people can get murdered by unambiguously evil necromancers and their neighbors just shrug it off as Mundos. Jaskar, the invisible Khajiit from before, managed to survive due to being invisible at the time of the slaughter. although he remarks that Mannimarco seems to have seen through the invisibility, which is not an unreasonable feat considering the spell Detect Life exists. That makes him remarking on Echo Cave and claiming he'll destroy the Mages Guild while stealing all of the Mages' souls a pretty alpha move.
He killed them, one by one. Volonaro was last, I think. He was trying to run away, but he didn't make it, did he?
Damn, he's the only guy that teaches Summon Dremora Lord, too. Traven's shocked and says he'll need 2 days to come to a decision. Alright, 1 Ayleid ruin, some macro training, and a couple hours of using the wait function later, and the council has collapsed. Traven words it a bit strangely. He uses plurals to describe singular people. Maybe the idea was that there were going to be more members of the Council of Mages, but it was never finished. The council, thus far, is Archmage Traven, Erlav Chorrol, Karanya, Chancellor Okado, and Raminus Polis. Yeah, he's in the council, but you wouldn't be able to tell at a glance. Now sure, the council is supposedly already split when a bunch of guild members left after the necromancy ban. I think the real problem though is that the Arcane University simply isn't big enough. The council chamber is tiny, and most of the grounds of the university is just wasted space. The bulk of the space is taken up by the Orrery, which isn't even used in the questline, and they don't even mention who the former council members were or even if they actually joined the Necromancers. We're given a choice of tracking down the 2 council members who absconded with artifacts the guild was holding, Erlav Chorrol with the Bloodworm Helm and Karanya with the Necromancer's Amulet. We're going after the amulet first because it's shown up in every Elder Scrolls game. You would think that would be of great interest to Mannimarco, considering it's his artifact. So we head over to the abandoned Imperial Fort number 56, and there are a bunch of unnamed mages there who direct us to speak with Karanya, and are doing creepy smiles and are nervously sweating knowing they have to speed change into their necromancer robes once Karanya reveals that she is going to give the amulet to Mannimarco. Okay, we reported the Echo Cave thing to Traven, right? He probably brought it up, so why didn't you go to Mannimarco? Why are we here, southwest of Chorrol?
Well, this is quite a surprise. I thought you were Traven's lapdog, doing whatever he said. And yet, here you are.
Is this commentary on the questline? Is Brian Chapin begging for somebody to let him make an actual interactive story and not just a Hogwarts-themed 18-part instruction list? So we kill Karanya and fight our way out and turn over the Necromancer's Amulet. Curiously, this is permanent. Before you say anything, being able to get the amulet from the Archmage's nightstand after completing the questline is an addition of the unofficial Oblivion patch, and is not in the base game, although there is a glitch. But why do people want this necklace anyways? Well, it's leveled, but to Karanya, who is surprisingly not leveled, but fixed at level 30. So the necklace is always in its best condition, which is Fortify Willpower and Intelligence, 14 points. Fortify Conjuration, 12 points. Fortify Magicka, 130 points. Which, with the Intelligence boost, is 158 extra Magicka, but at the cost of Drain Strength and Endurance, 25 points. It's weaker than its Morrowind counterpart, but obviously desirable enough that even the lore-friendly patchers added a way to get it back. At least without a glitch. After this, we're off to abandoned Imperial Fort number 57, which is full of necromancers, who you'll find are battling it out with a bunch of Daedra, and at the back of the cave is Erlav Chorrol's corpse wearing the Bloodworm Helm. It's a light armor helm with a leveled Fortify Conjuration effect, and apparently, this is news to me, it gives you the spell Essence Drain while you wear it, which is an absurdly cheap absorb spell that does fatigue, health, and magicka. But I wouldn't be able to cast it because even though I meet the magicka requirements, my restoration skill would need to be 75 to use it anyways. Actually, only the Bloodworm Helm you acquire between levels 1 and 4 gives you the Essence Drain spell, as the other helms are bugged in the base game, so if you didn't notice the spell because it didn't give you one, that's why. Just be sure to level up to 15 to get the best staff, and then unlevel back to 4 to get a useful Bloodworm Helm.
I shall return the helm to a secure place in the tower. It's the least I can do for Erlav. Thank you. Have you recovered the Necromancer's Amulet? Before we continue, you should speak to Raminus Polis about your advancement within the guild.
I'm sorry, did I walk in on you jerking off? Maybe get a secretary so I don't have to report on your dead colleagues in your masturbatorium. We're Master Wizard now, but don't think for a second that actually means anything. Traven has apparently learned of a colossal black soul gem that has been created in the alien ruin of Cylorn. How? Everyone in the Mages Guild is incompetent, and we are shown spies failing directly. I'm really curious how exactly this information is being gleaned. We get sent down to Cylorn to check on some battle mages who are sitting outside of the ruin not accomplishing much as the door is magically locked. I wouldn't be surprised if the magical lock was actually just a stick propped up against the door. Anyways, they're planning an ambush and leave it up to us to decide where the individual members go. At our disposal, we have Axewoman, Spellwoman, and Healing Man. I wonder what the right place for each person is. The ambush happens when 3 Necromancers and Falcar leave the ruin. Falcar flees with the soul gem as soon as the fighting starts, and it's up to us to clear out this ruin full of Necromancers and undead. Montage.
I know that death will never do us part. I look at the mark here, I spit in his face.
With the colossal black soul gem in hand, Traven reveals his master plan. We are to go to Echo Cave, wipe out the final cave full of Necromancers for this questline, and confront Mannimarco, the King of Worms. Manny will try to enthrall us, but thanks to the colossal black soul gem, it'll fail and we'll be able to kill him. Traven then commits suicide, soul-trapping himself in the soul gem and condemning his soul to the soul cairn.
Farewell, my friend.
You would dare to approach the King of Worms? If you seek an audience with his grace, you must open this door. I hold the key, and I will die defending it. I see Bolor was unsuccessful in delaying you. Very well. I shall reanimate him once we are done here.
Alright, let's talk about Mannimarco. Manny Boy is a cartoon villain. Dude, I get you're into the whole necromancy, dark arts, black hoods, and monologue thing. But what happened? Did the reasonable, political savvy side of you split off to become the divine being and you're stuck on Norn with all the angst and hormones? Never mind his goofy appearance, why not draw from his Daggerfall uniform? With a hood, his face concealed in shadows, and his eyes glowing in unnerving blue. We're not even going to get into the Elder Scrolls Online version of Marco, but let's set visuals aside and how he presents himself. Is he a good boss fight? It is universally agreed, even among fans of Oblivion, that Mannimarco is not a satisfying boss fight for the Mages Guild. But let's actually analyze him. Mannimarco, when put under scrutiny, actually highlights a fundamental lack of understanding in game design. Mannimarco's stats scale based on the player, so in theory he's supposed to be somewhat challenging regardless of when you face him. However, his magicka actually caps at 350. He knows 4 spells. One is the scripted spell he uses to start to paralyze us for the monologue. The remaining 3 spells are a paralyze spell for 7 seconds, which will take 332 magicka. He can cast this spell exactly once before being out of magicka. His second spell is a shock damage spell that does 20 points of damage for 2 seconds in an area of 15. This costs 243 magicka, so he can cast this one once and then need to regenerate for a short time to cast it again. His third spell summons a lich, but costs 700 magicka. It is mathematically impossible for Mannimarco to cast this spell. His remaining spells are determined by a leveled list, which itself contains 5 other leveled lists to fill out the remainder of his spell roster with 5 random spells. However, because he only has 350 magicka, he consistently runs out and then decides to fall back on his backup weapon, a dagger. Mannimarco is a necromancer. The necromancer class often falls back on summoning daggers as backup weapons, but confusingly, they do not have blade in their skill lineup. They do, however, have athletics, sneak, and blunt. 2 skills the player won't see NPCs using, and 1 skill the necromancers can't utilize because they can't conjure maces. Mannimarco, however, doesn't conjure his weapon. He instead carries a generic silver dagger. That's right, his weapon choice is not leveled. Whether you come here at level 1 or level 50, Mannimarco will always fall back on a silver dagger that he doesn't have the blade skill to use effectively. The player would have to reach level 190 just for Mannimarco to reach skill level 25 with his backup weapon. Note that at this level, the player would have somewhere between 600 and 2000 health. So even if the player fought naked, Mannimarco's dagger would likely break before managing to kill the player. He only has 2 other items to his person, his unenchanted robes and the Staff of Worms, which reanimates bodies. Except there's no bodies in the boss arena for him to reanimate. He does, however, have a unique birth sign, fortifying his health 100 points, his intelligence 20 points, and giving him a 50% resistance to magic, normal weapons, and paralysis. So at least he's got that going for him. Mannimarco is an amazingly bad boss fight, in a game where the concept of boss encounters is dubious as is. Let's fix this up. First, we'll give Mannimarco a whole 1000 magicka, plus additional spell points from scaling, and 25% spell absorption to boot. We'll also up his resist normal weapon stat to 75% from 50%. At half health, we can script him to initiate a second conversation, something like, "Nice try, mortal, but that wasn't even 1% of my power," or some filler bullshit like that, and then we'll spawn in a bunch of skeletons into the fight. As it stands, Mannimarco, this ancient threat to the Mages Guild that dates back to Golarion, is indistinguishable from any of the other Altmer Necromancers we've fought so far. Off his corpse, we receive the Staff of Worms, a primitive version of the reanimation spells that would appear in Skyrim. Raminus tells us that the Archmage left a note appointing us Archmage. I don't know if that included a qualifier like, on the condition they beat Mannimarco, because it's basically up to us if you want to undo the legacy of Archmage Hannibal Traven and permit necromancy again. Because remember, that's what this whole quest line boils down to. 2 years prior to Oblivion, Traven became Archmage and made the decision to ban necromancy from the Mages Guild. Not from Cyrodiil, just the Mages Guild. However, I feel some people have made a mistake in their understanding of this story. Traven didn't ban necromancy because of the return of Mannimarco. Rather, Mannimarco returned after Traven banned necromancy. Mannimarco would have inevitably returned to Cyrodiil to destroy the Mages Guild, given his beef with Golarion. But that doesn't change the fact that the ban on necromancy was proactive, not reactive. There's a book on necromancy titled The Black Arts on Trial, penned by, who else? Hannibal Traven. The book details the debate between 2 Mages Guild magisters, one from elsewhere and one from Orsinium, discussing the issue of banning necromancy. Master Grakog argues that the guild should form an objective understanding of necromancy, while Master Carlos argues that necromancy is the work of Satan and should be banned. The book tries to justify Carlos's position by later stating that Grakog was a necromancer and that Traven attempted to have her arrested, despite necromancy only being a provincial crime in Morrowind. Traven even calls her a slave to the black arts, and that her only possible motivation for endorsing this study of necromancy was to the benefit of evil. Like, hold on. If this was a discussion on banning destruction magic, and the person making the defense for destruction was a master of destruction magic, would they be called a slave? It doesn't seem unreasonable that the person you got to mount the defense of the art was in fact a practitioner. Throughout this section, I have pointed out time and time again the incompetence of Mages Guild members. It is my belief that some early draft of the story was about how the Mages Guild had lost its way as an organization, and that the ban on necromancy would inevitably be the downfall of the Mages Guild. Indeed, that is what ends up happening between Oblivion and Skyrim. However, when it came time to translate the idea into a questline, it seems the purpose of the story was lost or changed. Instead of being a questline pitting 2 Mages Guild factions, the Necromancers versus the rest of the guild, where the player may choose between an amoral but objective art versus the morally good but ideologically corrupted Mages Guild.
Oh, my dear, I didn't mean to imply that you have a choice.
It became the story of a renegade faction of outwardly evil mages out to destroy everything that is good and holy, justifying satanic panic, and only we can stop this threat. The more I analyzed this story, the more I realized that it has the potential to be one of the greatest questlines in a Bethesda game. I'm not even kidding, the pieces are all here. The setup is here. An ideological conflict about the role and purpose of the Mages Guild? Is it a faction dedicated to the study of magic, or is it a magical regulator that cowers before the whims of the non-magical population? Traven's position as a hardline anti-necromancer could embody everything that has gone wrong with the guild. Someone who is opposed to the guild's understanding of an entire school of magic was allowed to dictate to the Mages Guild from Black Marsh to High Rock that necromancy was not to be studied. If the player was a necromancer, they might arrive at the university to suddenly find themselves saddled with the same choice that other guild necromancers like Kauthar, Karanya, and Falkar had to make. Do we continue our membership, depriving ourselves of a school of magic, or do we join the necromancer faction, depriving ourselves of all other magical services? Instead, look at what we got. It's easy to sit around and speculate about what could have been. The Mages Guild questline could have been a quest about building an airship fleet to go conquer Akavir. But when all the pieces are already here, and when all these elements are half-formed, it makes you question why. If the Necromancers aren't going to be joinable, then why write the Mages Guild members like this? In Morrowind, there was a spectrum between politics and academics-focused mages. Edwina Elbert represented the academic aspect of the guild, and most of her quests focused on the acquisition of knowledge. Trebonius Arturius represented the political aspect of the guild. Every quest involving him focused on the political relationship the guild had with Morrowind. Renus Atheris was politics-focused, while Ajira in the same guild hall was more academic with minor politics. Skink and Tree Shade was a mix of politics and academics, and you have to do all of his quests to get the option to peacefully replace Trebonius Arturius. However, in Oblivion, all the mages are just incompetent academics. It's hard to see how there were two separate magical factions in a post-Oblivion Cyrodiil. Given pretty much everyone we meet in the guild is on team fuck necromancy, most of these people would absolutely join the Synod and go on to ban Conjuration if it means they can continue to get paid to do nothing. I just love the line the necromancers drew in the sand. In the year 421, the Empire passed the Levitation Act, which banned the use of levitation magic across the Empire. Morrowind was exempt due to the Armistice, but Cyrodiil obviously wasn't. 421 was only 12 years prior to Oblivion, and this wasn't a guild-only ban like Necromancy, this was the outright criminalization of levitation magic. If only I could think of examples where you break the law in an Elder Scrolls game, maybe even 2 whole factions dedicated to that concept. Alas, I cannot. Apparently the Necromancers in the Mages Guild were fine with the ban on levitation. The power of flight. The ability to ascend vertically into the atmosphere. The Necromancers, they're a little sleepy. There's nothing that could stir them awake. But the practice of reanimating the dead, where its practitioners often target bodies without consent and raise abominations to the point of soul-trapping humanoid souls, we ban the practice of necromancy just in the guild halls. And all of a sudden, they are wide awake, rebelling. Half of the Mages Guild Council resigns in disgust at this gross violation of magical study. And this is why I think the Mages Guild fails as a magical faction. It doesn't require magic, it barely encourages magic, and it fundamentally does not understand magic. Speaking of not understanding magic, let's finally discuss Frostcrag Spire, the DLC home option for the magical player. It's a wizard's tower atop a peak overlooking Cyrodiil. That's pretty cool, and it looks great with a distinct style over substance design. The deed appears in your pocket as the tower's master was apparently our dead relative, Terrace Rindel, Archmage. What? I guess he was the Archmage before Traven, although he sounds notably Dunmer. Given that he's supposed to be the player's relative, it might not be a good idea to actually name him. Anyways, he built the tower but failed to put the finishing flourishes on it, and so bequeaths that responsibility upon us. The first thing are the Enchanting and Spellcrafting Station, which apparently require special permission from the Arcane University. We need to buy candles for them to work. Working with the master alchemist Sendarion, he created the apparatus table, which fortifies our alchemy 15 points. He also built an Atronak table, which will do those permanent summons of Atronachs you may have spotted me using, in exchange for 3 of their salts. Kind of smart, since you can't really summon Storm Atronachs without reaching the level 19. Psych, there are enough Void Salts in the world to actually do it at level 1, but still, this is cool. He also made portals to the Mages Guild halls. Seriously, what? He needed permission for custom spell and enchantment stations, but could casually create teleporters that span half the continent. The garden here also provides access to plants that are limited in the base game during the main quest. For all those reasons, Frostcrag Spire was my base for this playthrough. Even though you now have the ability to buy houses in every city, I usually only bother with the house in the waterfront until I've made enough money to purchase the upgrades for Frostcrag Spire.